وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. Okay. Alhamdulillah, wa salatu salam ala Rasulullah. Welcome to Tazkiyah al-Quran. And this is our weekly class, as you know, in which we are going through the 30th juz for now. And we're going surah by surah. Every week we do one surah, and in 30 minutes, we go through the surah and we try to reflect on the lessons in terms of how the Quran is connecting our heart with our Creator. Last week we did Surah Al Kaafirun, and we're going to start, as we always do, with a review of what we covered last time. So we said in the Quran, the wisdom that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to us through the Quran and through Islam, as well as the community of the Muslims that we are a part of, these are included in the abundant goodness that believers have been given. This abundant goodness, it means that there is the ease of the eternal life that we will all go through, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us among them in the hereafter. And it also means that this abundant goodness comes with a responsibility. And in this world, there will be some difficulties. And it is the promise of that abundant goodness of the afterlife that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made with us in return for the difficulties that we face in this life. And what we have to do is follow the ideal human being, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and he showed in his life patience and sacrifice. We talked about this last time. His life was the most difficult of all of us. And what we do, whatever we do in following him, we do it for the for our love for him, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That was Surah Al Kawthar. We're going to, inshallah, be doing Surah Al Kafirun today, but allow me to take a moment to set it up. There is, in Surah Al Kawthar, there is this background that we talked about last time, that the Prophet's son had passed away and the kuffar had used very insulting language for him. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded in Surah Al Kawthar. Surah Al Kafirun is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordering the Prophet to use stark language. So Muslims do not humiliate others, but the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al Kafirun, as soon as we start it, the language will be such that we will all feel that it's a bit stark. And that was an order by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do that. It's almost like there's a message being given to those who have chosen not to believe, who have chosen to cover up the truth, despite their own fitrah telling them that, despite them seeing the evidence all around them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ordering the Prophet ﷺ to talk to them the way they deserve to be talked to. This is not just the Prophet ﷺ, though. This also happened with his forefather, Ibrahim alayhi salam, who was another messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who was sent to the people living in the northern and western Middle East, the people of Iraq, the people of southern Turkey, the people of Palestine, and also the people of Egypt. So this is the description of Ibrahim alayhi salam, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us this description as an example. And you will notice that even Ibrahim alayhi salam drew and those who did not, even if they came from the same ethnic group, they spoke the same language. So in all other ways, they were the same people. But there was a dividing line that Ibrahim alayhi salam drew, and that dividing line was belief. This is in Surah Al-Mumtahana, verse 4. And I'm thankful to my wife for sharing this with me. قَدْ كَانَتْ لَكُمْ أسوة حسنة في إبراهيم والذين معه إذ قالوا لقومهم إنا براء منكم ومما تعبدون من دون الله كفرنا بكم وبدأ بيننا وبينكم العداوة والبغضاء أبدا حتى تؤمنوا بالله وحده إلا قول إبراهيم لأبيه لأستغفرن لك وما أملك لك من الله من شيء ربنا عليك توكلنا وإليك أنبنا وإليك المصير. So roughly translated, it means you already have, you meaning all of us, we already have an excellent example in Ibrahim alayhi salam and those with him. So this is the group of believers of that time. When they said to their people, the people who had the same, let's just say the same race as them or the same nationality as them, so they said to these people, we those believers, we totally dissociate ourselves from you and shun whatever idols you worship besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We reject you. The enmity and hatred that has arisen between us, and you will last until you believe. The enmity and hatred that has arisen between us and you will last until you believe in Allah alone. Meaning, we will connect with you again. Yeah, you say that we're part of the same people, but in reality, we are a different people. So this is the dividing line. The only exception is when Ibrahim alayhi salam said to his father, I will seek forgiveness for you, adding, but I cannot protect you from Allah at all. The believers prayed, our Lord, in you we trust, and to you we always turn, and to you is the final return. So this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describing what happened between Ibrahim alayhi salam and the believers of his time. Something similar happened in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, because the kuffar of Mecca, they were trying to find ways to somehow get through to the Muslims. So these are relatively early days in Mecca. The Prophet ﷺ had been preaching for a while and had been preaching publicly. And the people of Mecca, the leaders of Mecca, were beginning to get worried. Okay, what do we do now? How do we respond to this guy? And they tried many things. And most of you know those things, so I will not go into a lot of detail in terms of this background, but I will very quickly mention them just so they're fresh in our minds. They attacked the message of Islam by describing it as divisive. Oh, these Muslims, they're dividing up our people. We used to be one people, but now there are cracks between us. People living in one home, some are Muslim, some are not. And suddenly it's, we used to be one people and now we become two people. Similarly, they attacked the Prophet ﷺ himself by describing him as a poet or a soothsayer. They pressured the Prophet ﷺ through his family. They went to his uncle. And then they tried to bribe the Prophet ﷺ. All of this didn't work. Remember, he had been promised Al Kawthar. How could they compete with that? You and I have been promised by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well, right? And we have to remember that, because there will be opportunities for us to give up as well, and these come as tests from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what the Quraysh did was something very political. They decided to compromise with him. They wanted to get a leg in somehow. So they sent a delegation to him while he was making tawaf of the Kaaba. And we know it from Ibn Ishaq that Aswad, Walid, Umayyah, and As bin Wa'il, they came to the Prophet ﷺ. And they offered to him that, oh Muhammad, there's been this disagreement going on between us. We realize that your religion is important to you. So we tell you what. How about we divide up the time such that we will worship your religion according to your religion for part of the time? And some narrations say they said 1 year, and some other narrations say 1 day, some say 1 month. But let's just say they said divide up the time. So we'll divide up the time. We'll do it for part of the time, and then for the rest of the time, you worship according to your traditional religion, our faith. So we kind of do a mix and match kind of a thing, and it's a compromise. You see, we have a point of view, and you have a point of view. But good negotiation means that maybe we should meet in the middle. That's what reasonable people do. That's the kind of conversation they had with the Prophet ﷺ. Notice that they already believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Quraysh did. We know that for a fact. The Quraysh believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But they believed in these idols as the path of getting to Allah. They believed that these idols kind of get their dua across to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what they believed. Now, Surah Al Kaafirun, by the way, is very direct. This is the response that Allah sent to the Prophet ﷺ. The response goes, and you guys know the surah, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل يا أيها الكافرون. Say, O Prophet, O you disbelievers. Now, the word for kafir we use here is disbeliever, which in terms of meaning is correct, but I want you to understand the literal meaning as well. Kafara or kafir is the same as cover, kafir, cover. Same word, okay? Roughly meaning the same thing, same etymology. So a kafir is someone who covers something up. In this case, the kafir is covering up the truth, covering up his or her own fitrah. Generally, the word kafir before Islam used to describe somebody who is an ingrate, someone who's not grateful for the good things that have been done to that person, because they cover up all the good that have been done to them. In Islam, technically, it's also come to mean somebody who is a disbeliever. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ. Now, in Islam, we don't insult people, so kafir is not an insulting word, but it is very stark. It is very direct. It is very clear. You are a disbeliever, and I'm addressing you in that way because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered me to do it. لا أعبد ما تعبدون. I do not worship what you worship. ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد. And nor do you worship what I worship. Notice the choice of words used here. Remember that this dividing line is not being made by us. We're not claiming that we are better. We are not claiming that other people are lesser than us. All we're saying is there's this dividing line that Allah has made between us, those who believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the day of judgment and his final messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the angels and our iman, that is our iman, and there are other people who don't have this iman. And that dividing line is important. It is so important that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders us to declare this dividing line to those who don't believe. And this makes it our identity. Now, obviously, this doesn't mean we have to be unkind to people. It just means that there's that dividing line. I just want to mention one quick point. I've recently heard some people say that there are the Muslims and the Kafirs, and there's some group in the middle as well. That's not correct. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in the Quran, مِنْهُمُ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَمِنْهُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. So basically, there are Muslims and then there are the kuffar. There is no third category. Among the kuffar, of course, there are grades. So there are ones who are perhaps very open to eventually becoming Muslims, and that's fine. That's good. We have to be kind and nice to them. And then there are others who are very, very strongly opposed and they want to be our enemies. And then we have to protect ourselves from them. And then, of course, there may be other categories, or, there may be a spectrum in the middle as well. There's Ahl al-Kitab who are also kuffar, but the Ahl al-Kitab have a higher status if they live among Muslims. So I just wanted to make sure that that point is clear. The surah continues, وَلَا أَنَا عَابِدٌ مَا عَبَدْتُمْ. And I will never worship what you worship. وَلَا أَنْتُمْ عَابِدُونَ مَا أَعْبُدُ. Notice that this verse is being repeated. Nor will you ever worship what I worship. لَكُمْ دِينُكُمْ وَلِيَ دِينِ. You have your way and I have my way. So the point here is that Tawheed, or belief in one God, cannot be 99%. It is not acceptable for it to be 99%. It has to be 100%. The question then is, why the repetition? I want you to think about that question, and I want you to respond in the chat window. Why do you think it's being repeated? قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ وَلَا أَنْتُمْ عَابِدُونَ مَا أَعْبُدُ وَلَا أَنَا عَابِدٌ مَا عَبَدتُّمْ وَلَا أَنْتُمْ عَابِدُونَ مَا أَعْبُدُ. It's being repeated like twice. Both these statements are being repeated. What is the reason for that? Why are they being repeated? It's important for us to start contemplating now. This is obviously a very important reason, right? Okay, so emphasis is one reason. You are right. So ta'keed, or emphasis, is one reason. Sure, it's that important. The dividing line is that important. Okay, that's emphasis. Any other reason that you guys can think of? MashaAllah, we have very intelligent people, and sometimes I read your comments and I can tell that you guys are deep thinkers. That's good. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you with more knowledge. So okay, because the ilah of the Prophet ﷺ is the one true God, sure, and then also saying that we're distinguishing between the one true God and their false idols. Okay, sure. Emphasis for present and past states. Okay, good. So that's good, our brother Ahmed. That's true. Emphasis for present and past, because if you notice the wording, قُلْ يَا لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ, that's the present tense. And then وَلَا أَنَا عَابِدٌ مَا عَبَدْتُمْ, also talking about the past. So it's past, present, future. It's not going to happen now, and it's not going to happen in the future. So that's also true. And our sister says, because their heart is now closed. Okay, that is possible, because we're talking about the kinds of kuffar who have kind of made a decision that they're going to oppose Islam. That is true. But let's not make an assumption like that. This is just a caveat. You're right, but let's just remember this caveat. The person that we come across in our lives who is a kafir, let's not assume that that's how that person will end their lives. We don't know how our lives will end and how that person's life will end. So always let's stay open to the possibility of them eventually becoming Muslim. So we will continue to try and fulfill our duty as the ones who will communicate the message. Okay, so those are some reasons. one last reason why it is repeated is that it is also for who we worship and how we worship. Who we worship, of course, is we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they worship idols. How we worship is something that you guys may not be fully aware of or we may not fully appreciate. All we know is in the Quran, there's a phrase used to describe their worship. Muka'an wa tasdiya, which is kind of like saying when they worship God, their worship of God is like loud clapping and singing, and that's the kind of worship that they had. It was a little bit absurd because sometimes they used to worship God without any clothes. And they had their own philosophy for why they wanted to do that. And today, an anthropologist might look at history and say, oh, wow, these people were so interesting. They had their worship done in this way. Yeah, sure, academically, it might be interesting to you, but for us, worship is a sacred act, and it has to be done according to the way that the Creator has told us to worship Him. So we don't mess with that. That's the other difference. Their worship was this strange concoction of rituals that they had come up with. Our worship is what we have been told by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what all the prophets before Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam were also told by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do. Interesting thing, by the way, we see Christians today as worship, they kind of kneel and then they put their hands together before the cross. If you have ever had the opportunity to see a Coptic Christian, these are Christians in Egypt. If you've ever seen them worship, their traditional way of worship is, lo and behold, they make sujood. They make sujood like Muslims. They make sujood. This is not something they learn from Muslims. This is something they used to do. Their sujood are a little bit different. They kind of stretch their arms out, but they make sujood in the direction of Al-Quds. The same thing is true. Is also remnants of what they learned from the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the original rituals that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught to Adam alayhi salam, and eventually to Sheeth alayhi salam, and eventually to Nuh alayhi salam, and eventually to Musa alayhi salam, and Isa alayhi salam, and Sulaiman, and Dawood, and all the prophets, and eventually to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the manner of worship is pretty much the same. Of course, the Sharia tends to change a little bit, but otherwise, the manner of worship is the same. That is another difference between us and them. Final point here before I move on is lakum dinukum waliyadin. This is the way it's described in Arabic, even though the translation is very good, it's not fully captured in the translation. Lakum dinukum. Notice, for those of you who know Arabic, it is lakum dinukum. It is not dinukum lakum. So the sequence of the words tells us that it is a very exclusive way of speaking. Lakum dinukum, your way is only for you. Waliya deen, my way is for me. That means I'm not going to take any little bit of your way. Your way is only for you. Your way is like far away from me. I'm not going to take any little bit of your way. It is not saying dinukum lakum, that you have your way, which is how it's been translated. It is actually saying your way is like only for you. So I just wanted to close with this, and wanted to mention two things that are important, and maybe tell you one interesting story about this dividing line as well. So the first one is something that you see on the screen, which is a verse of poetry by Iqbal from his poem, which is one of my favorite poems ever. Sultan Tipu Ki Wasiyat. So the verse of poetry goes like this: Baatil dui pasand hai, haq la sharik hai, shirkate mayane, haqqo baatil na kar qabul. I translated it, and obviously this is not a perfect translation because you need to be a poet to be able to do it properly. But basically, what it means is falsehood wants to mix truth with its lies. That's because, and this is brilliant, because in the Quran we also know that the kuffar of Quraysh, they always mentioned Allah in their conversations when they were talking to Muslims, because they knew that without the mention of some truth, their falsehood would not stand. The kuffar always do that. Every time you're having a conversation with someone, having a discussion with someone about truth and falsehood, they will always bring in a little bit of truth, because otherwise their untruth cannot stand. But then they mix it with their lies. So falsehood wants to mix truth with its lies, but the truth wants to be clear of any pollution, any adulteration. The truth stands on its own. So for you, Iqbal says, "Shirkate mayane haqqo batil fil qubul." So reject the middle ground between truth and falsehood when it is offered to you. That compromise that the Quraysh came to the Prophet ﷺ and asked him to make, okay, let's just do this thing in the middle. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to the Prophet ﷺ, say to them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was not even talking to them directly. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, "Qul ya ayyuhal kafirun," say to them. Allah is not addressing them directly in this case. Meaning they're not even worth it. قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ. There's no middle ground here. Look, middle ground and everything else, we are ready to negotiate. We're ready to compromise on any worldly matter. But when it comes to our religion, I'm sorry, there is no middle ground. I believe only in one God. I believe in his final messenger. That's it. That doesn't make me special. It doesn't make me better than you. This is my only path to salvation. That's the dividing line. So about this, I wanted to share with you an actual incident that took place in the life of Umar ibn Khattab. So this is with one of the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ. You guys know the story of the Sahabi who was sent to Kisra of Persia and with the letter of the Prophet ﷺ, and Kisra then tore that letter. How many of you remember that story or have come across that story, where the king of Persia tore the letter of the Prophet ﷺ and eventually his own kingdom was taken away from him as well? Anyone remember that story? Yeah, okay. So some people remember it. Okay. So very briefly, because that's not relevant to what I'm going to discuss with you, I just wanted to mention that the Prophet ﷺ sent one of his Sahaba, whose name was Abdullah bin Hudhafa, to the king of Persia with his letter. And the letter was to invite the king of Persia to Islam, just like many other people were sent to other rulers. This is after Hudaybiyah, when the Muslims could breathe easy a little bit, and then the Prophet started inviting other kings and rulers to Islam. Abdullah bin Hudhafa traveled all the way to Persia, Persepolis probably, that was the capital of Persia at that time, and this is in Iraq, sorry, modern-day Iran, close to Tehran somewhere. So he traveled there, he traveled to the court of Kisra, and he handed in the letter. I'm summarizing the story. There's a lot more interesting, tasty detail, but since it's not relevant to our topic, I'm just quickly mentioning. He gave him the letter. Kisra started listening to the letter. In the letter, the Prophet ﷺ had said, okay, this is a letter from me, Muhammad ﷺ, the messenger of God, to Kisra, the king of Persia. But Kisra became angry because Muhammad ﷺ had mentioned his name before the name of the king of Persia. And he tore up the letter and became very angry, and they kicked out Abdullah bin Hudhafa, the messenger. Abdullah bin Hudhafa came out, and he said, okay, I did my duty, and he left. He left. In the meanwhile, Kisra, he calmed down a little bit, and he said, okay, call that guy again. Well, that guy couldn't be found because that guy had left and gone back to Medina. He arrived in Medina, told the Prophet ﷺ, this is what happened. The Prophet said, okay, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tear his kingdom up the way he tore my letter up. And that's what happened, because Kisra's own son killed him, and then the Persia started breaking apart. Again, I'm skipping a lot of details which are very interesting, but they're not relevant. I'm going to the most important and relevant detail now, which is this man, Abdullah bin Hudhafa, who was sent to the king of Persia. This same man, later on, after the Prophet had passed away, was involved in a battle that took place between the Muslims and the Christians of that time, the Byzantine Empire or the Eastern Roman Empire. In that battle, some Muslims were taken captive, and Abdullah bin Hudhafa was among them. The king of Byzantium, or the Eastern Roman Empire, this was Heracul or Heraclius. So Heraclius was a scholar of the Bible, and he knew that the Prophet was a true prophet. He knew that because he had already interrogated Abu Sufyan many years ago, and many of you would know the story. So he knew that. And Muslims also knew that, okay, this guy knows that we're the real deal. The Prophet has already passed away, and Heraclius now wants to meet some Muslim, some follower of Islam, and he wants to, interview this person, because in his own book he must have read all these stories, and he wants to now check to see what has happened to the followers of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he had ordered his soldiers, if you find a captive who is who has been close to this man, this preacher Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then bring him to me. So Abdullah bin Hudhafa and his companions who were captured in this battle, they were taken to see Heraclius. They go to see Heraclius, and Heraclius looks at them and tries to find out who among them was the closest to the Prophet ﷺ, and turns out Abdullah bin Hudhafa was one of the earliest Muslims. So he says, okay, you come forward. And he told Abdullah, he told him, look, you can see your condition. You're in trouble now, and I can order you to be killed, but I would rather that I offer you something. So I'm going to offer that you become a Christian, and this thing can be over between us. I will let you be. In fact, not just that, I'm going to give you some money and I will honor you. So Abdullah bin Hudhafa, without even thinking about it, said, yeah, that's not possible. So Heraclius, surprised, he said, okay, I'll tell you what. If you become a Christian, I will share my kingdom with you. Abdullah bin Hudhafa responded in a very natural kind of way, not shocked, not surprised, nothing like that. He just said, yeah, that's not possible. You can share your kingdom with me. You can share the rulership of all of Arabia with me. I'm not going to become a Christian. I'm a Muslim. So Heraclius then said, okay, if that is the case, then I'll tell you what. You look like a brave man, and I am going to I'm going to kill you just to test you how brave you are. And the way I'm going to do it is I will hang you up. So they hung Abdullah bin Hudhafa upside down, and he told one of his archers to shoot an arrow at Abdullah, but he told his archer, shoot the arrow such that it hurts his hands, but doesn't kill him. So they shot the arrows, and the arrows pierced the sides of his hands, but didn't kill him. And at that time, then Heraclius asked him again, you know what I mean, right? Now tell me, would you consider becoming a Christian? Abdullah bin Hudhafa said, no, that's not possible. So then he became frustrated. He said, okay, now shoot his feet. So the archer shot at his feet, and his feet were injured. So they asked him again, would you consider becoming a Christian now? And Abdullah bin Hudhafa said, no, not at all. I'm a Muslim, and I will not consider becoming Christian. So then Heraclius said, okay, this is not working. We're going to have to make things a little bit more serious now. So he asked for a pot of oil, large pot of oil, vat, a huge vat of oil, to be brought, and then they lit some fire under it until the oil started boiling. So he asked one of the Muslim prisoners to be brought and thrown into the oil. Two were brought, one was thrown into the oil. And of course, the person died. And in the narration, it is described how he died, but I don't want to repeat it. You can imagine, just like meat boils in boiling oil, that's how the person died. And Abdullah bin Hudhafa and that other Muslim prisoner standing next to him, and all the other Muslim prisoners are seeing all of this. So then he turned to Abdullah and he said, I offer you that you become a Christian and I will let you be. And Abdullah bin Hudhafa this time went forward and said, absolutely no. I will not become a Christian. I am a Muslim. This is what I believe, and I will not change it even a little bit. So then the Caesar, Heraclius, said, okay, then throw him into the fire. So Abdullah bin Hudhafa is now being taken to the pot of oil, and he's about to be thrown into the vat with oil boiling in front of him. And all this while, everyone, this is the court of Heraclius, right? So everyone is staring at Abdullah. And the people, the soldiers who were taking him to the vat, they noticed that he had teared up. There were tears coming down his cheeks. So they told Heraclius, he's crying. So Heraclius said, okay, bring him to me. Abdullah bin Hudhafa was taken to Heraclius. And Heraclius said, okay, now would you consider becoming Christian? Abdullah bin Hudhafa said, no, that's not possible. I've already told you that. So Heraclius said, then why were you crying? Abdullah bin Hudhafa said, the reason why I cried is because when I saw the boiling vat of oil, I realized my life was coming to an end. And I also realized that I have only one life to give in the path of God. I wished that I had 1,000 lives, that I would give each one in the path of God. Now Heraclius was dumbfounded. He couldn't speak for a while. And then he said something which is not something that a king would say. He said something which a scholar of scripture would say. He said, okay, if you kiss my head, I will let you go. So Abdullah bin Hudhafa thought about it and immediately decided to negotiate. They said, okay, will you let me go and all the other Muslims with me go as well? Heraclius said, yes, I will let you go and all the other Muslims that I've captured with you as well. Abdullah thought about it and said, well, this guy is obviously an enemy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but kissing his head, that's a compromise I can make. So he kissed his head. And Heraclius, being a king and being a very public kind of a thing, he let them all go. Abdullah bin Hudhafa and the other Muslims with him, they made their way back to Muslim lands, and eventually they ended up with Umar bin Khattab, the Khalifa of the Muslims, and told him the whole story. Umar bin Khattab was so happy that he got up and he said, I make it mandatory on every Muslim to kiss the head of Abdullah bin Hudhafa, and I'm going to be the first one to do it. So he went up and he kissed the head of Abdullah bin Hudhafa. There were 2 points I wanted to make. Number one, there are times when we can compromise. In worldly matters, like kissing that guy's forehead, that's a compromise that's doable. But there are times that we cannot compromise. Like, for example, there's no compromise between worshiping one God and following the footsteps of his messenger Muhammad and any other faith. Let's make sure that that distinction is clear in our minds. Here are the lessons that we got today. First, being a Muslim means being kind and patient with those who are not Muslims yet, but underlining the difference. The second point that we looked at was there can be no compromise on who we worship and our way of worship, which has been taught to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through his messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The third point that we saw was falsehood always mixes some truth in itself to be able to exist. Otherwise, it will just crash. People will not believe it. And the final one was religious tolerance. In this world, people of other faiths have the right to worship as they will, even in a Muslim land. But that doesn't mean that there's no difference between our faith and their faith. This is what we learned in Surah Al Kaafirun. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to practice what we learned, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this a source of us getting close to Him. Inshallah, I will see you guys next Saturday. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.